Hey there, Real Estate Junkies. Before we dive into today's episode, we've got some game-changing resources to help you start buying and selling real estate on terms, the smart, creative way. Want to learn how to invest with little or no money down? Grab your free ebook, The 4 Game Plans, and discover the exact strategies we use every day. Get it now. The link is in the show notes. Looking for a complete step-by-step system to start making 3 paydays per deal? Check out the Quantum Leap System, our home study course packed with everything you need to close your first terms deal. Need a personalized strategy? Book a free one-on-one strategy session with one of our coaches. Just use coupon FREE3 at checkout. Ready to take action? Join the 3 Payday Apprentice Program and start working toward real estate success with direct mentorship. Want hands-on training with us? Spend 3 days at our In the Trenches Bootcamp, where we'll work side by side to lock in deals. And don't miss our biggest event of the year, QOS Live 2025. Connect with top investors, sharpen your skills, and take your business to the next level. Secure your spot today. All links are right below in the show notes. Click now and start building your real estate empire. Now, let's get into today's episode. Again, some small in the video today, Jeremiah led out with 5%. You don't want to nail yourself down with an exact number. So that's why we always use the words small. We don't normally do it, but it's something small. So we don't not pigeonhole ourselves into a certain percent down, because we're not opposed to it. Again, we're not saying we're not opposed to it, just as long as it makes sense for us, because our exit strategy is different. Normally it's the rent to own, and we're going to get that non-refundable down payment, and it's contingent on finding a buyer. So if the seller wants 5, we'll more than likely get 5 from the buyer, give it to the seller. Now whatever's left, we're gonna capture that and keep that, right? Welcome back, everybody, to Real Estate Junkies Coast to Coast. I'm your West Coast host, Rusty.
And I'm your East Coast host, Rick Abbiati.
Hey, Rick. Newly hand shave. So, Rick, I forgot to shave today. So,
yeah,
if you guys watch it on YouTube, pretty scruffy. So, I got my daughter's graduation on Wednesday. Graduating from college, so that's exciting news.
Congrats on that.
Yeah, thanks. We're gonna fly up there tomorrow. And then I don't know if I told you, but she's going to go to Puerto Rico and play softball.
Yeah, that's exciting.
She graduates Wednesday, flies out Friday, and plays on Saturday.
I think if I tried to throw a softball as fast as she does, it would end up in the bleachers.
Yeah. So she's going to do that. So, and I'm flying out there. My wife and I are flying out there, and then my son and I are going to stay out there, rent a trailer, and haul all of her stuff back home, drive it home, and then my wife's going to fly back home.
Nice.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, so again, we do our warm-up with mindset, skill set, or systems. We're going to talk about skill set today, and talking about down payment. We're getting that a lot lately. And then our game plan is going to lead into that, which is the owner financing deal that you're working on. And then our cool down, we're going to talk about the In the Trenches Bootcamp virtual event we had for non-associates, right? And with that, which was cool. Let's go back to the beginning of the warm-up. The warm-up is skill set, Rick, and a lot of our associates get hung up on when sellers want a down payment. There's a few ways you can address it. I don't think there's any cookie cutter way to address the down payment. What language-wise or scripting-wise, if I said, what kind of down payment are you going to give me?
First thing I ask is, what are you thinking as far as down payment? Just to get an idea. They could take $10,000. Okay, that gives you a lot more flexibility. They could, I had one that said he wanted 40% down. Not likely. I'd like to get an idea of what they're looking for. And then I'll go to the quadrant.
Yeah, we can talk about the quadrant in a bit, but you do go to the quadrant right away?
Yeah, it depends how the conversation's going. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll just go right into, I totally get it. For most of the sellers, first off, I'll say, what do you need it for? And how much do you need? just to get an idea, because sometimes they just want it for security purposes, and we can easily get over that.
Yeah, because I was going to ask or tell you, most people that want a down payment, because when we introduce owner financing, we always say, hey, you'd be acting as a bank. You're going to be in first position. We're simply going to make direct payments to you because you're going to the bank. The bank, they're thinking, okay, traditional bank's going to require some sort of down payment, right? So that's why a lot of times they'll do that. Another reason why is you talked about it, security. They always go super negative right away. The sky is falling. I need skin in the game in case you guys trash the place and I get the house back and I have to make all those repairs. So it's a confidence thing. So scripting. We can talk about the scripting, but go back to the quadrants. Talk about the quadrants. Hey, what do you need it for? And then you get into the quadrants, right?
Yeah, and then I'll just tell me we have 4 variables that we can work with, or 3, depending on what's been brought up. And I'll say we have price, we have term, which is the length of time or the definitive end date that you're cashed out on before that date. And you have monthly payment, and you have down payment. Now, obviously, in our situation, the sellers ask for down payment, so you do bring up that quadrant. If they don't mention down payment, let's say they mention interest, then it's price, term, and interest. What's most important to you? I can do some, but I can't do all because it's going to be a win.
Yeah. Out of those, right? So you want to nail them down. Out of the price, the down payment, and the monthly with interest, what's the one that's most important? Because I'm not going to be able to do all of them. So give it, and then most, if not all, will say I want my price. And say, okay, then what is the least you would take as far as the down payment, right? And then what would be the least you would take as far as interest rate? But so that's good. So my scripting, again, we all have different ways we approach it. We always end up in the same spot, meaning the quadrant, what's the most important. I've been tinkering with this script, which is, yeah, Rick, great question. If we do put money down, we're not opposed to it. We normally don't, because the sellers that we buy from prefer price rather than a small down, because they want to maximize the house. And then you get into, if we did, what would be the least you would take? So you want to lead into the sellers that we buy from prefer price rather than a small down payment. We always use the word small, right? Because a lot of the sellers are thinking 10, 15, 20%, sometimes 50%.
Very similar to what you just said. The other one that I use is most of the sellers we buy from don't really need the down payment. I use that with Jeff Cody, the seller with Jeff Cody, because he initially, I think he wanted 20% down, or maybe that one was 40% down. And I had asked what's priority. I think I asked him what his priority was. But anyway, I just said most of the sellers we buy from don't necessarily need their down payment. He said, I don't need my down payment.
Yeah, it's similar. Yeah, super similar. Hey, the sellers we buy from don't need a small down payment. So actually, I had it in reverse. So some of our sellers don't need a small down payment versus getting the price that they want because they want to maximize. So you're placing that seller that you're talking to in the place of other people that we've done this with. And
the other thing by saying that, you're playing with the ego.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Most of the sellers we buy from don't need down payment. A lot of them are going to say, I don't need it.
Yeah, I want it, but I don't need it. Yeah. Yeah, good point on that. I just wanted to get some scripting. Let's go back to what I was describing earlier, which was why need or want it. I think it's more of a want than need. And then you're real good at this with the SAFRIA and the BBB response, which and Chris mentioned it in his video today, as far as credibility and confidence, right? So if someone says, I want the money, or I need the money in case you guys trash the place and I'm gonna have to foreclose on you and blah, blah, blah. So what kind of scripting on that?
Well, first off, I will start almost every conversation. I do bring up the Creative Financing Real Estate Association accreditation. And I'll say that between me and my partners, we bought nearly 1,000 homes nationwide with a very high success rate. Right there is credibility. And you can bring up the BBB accreditation, A+. And we're on contract with you, and we say we say we're going to do, and we've never defaulted on a deal. to the state. And if we did, we would lose everything that we put into it. So that would make no sense. It is building that credibility. They're less likely to really hinge everything on the down payment if you do that, at least for security purposes. Now, I realize some of them may need it for moving costs or whatever, or a down payment of another home. And that can be worked depending on what it is.
Yeah, again, some small, and in the video today, Jeremiah let out with 5%. You don't want to nail yourself down with an exact number. So that's why we always use the words small. We don't normally do it, but it's something small. So we don't not pigeonhole ourselves into a certain percent down, because we're not opposed to it. Again, we're not saying we're not opposed to it, just as long as it makes sense for us, because, our exit strategy is different. Normally it's the rent to own, and we're going to get that non-refundable down payment. And it's contingent on finding a buyer. So if the seller wants 5, we'll more than likely get 5 from the buyer, give it to the seller. Now, whatever's left, we're going to capture that and keep that, right? Yeah. Good stuff. As far as owner financing and down payment, what's another chain?
The other thing that you mentioned is if they're worried about foreclosure, and you can use, if it's going to keep you up at night, then it's obviously not going to work for you. But I also do say we can also put a default paragraph in there that says if we're, for example, more than 31 days late 3 times over the term, the deed automatically gets transferred back to the seller.
Yeah, and I use that too. It's almost like a last resort. So I'm glad you brought that up, because after all, we say SAFRIA, we're nearing 1,000 transactions. It wouldn't make sense for us to, because we're buying the home, right? We don't talk about the buyer side, so they're assuming that we're going to trash it, or we're going to stop making payments. And so we use that SAFRIA. And again, if people don't know, we have a quantum leap system, a home study course that you go through each module, and you take a quiz, right? You take an assessment, and then after you're all done with your assessment, if you're an associate, you get accredited. And then if you are an associate, you get certified as the creative. Say it again. I always get the acronym mixed up.
Creative Financing Real Estate Association.
Yeah, SAFRIA, Creative Financing Real Estate Association. So it is an association. So we use that as far as our credibility with the seller. We are A+ Business Better Bureau rated. So it doesn't make sense for us to do that. And then you use that. But if that's something that's going to keep you up at night, then we're probably not the best fit for you. And then you pull back, right? That's when we usually pull back. If they are harping on the foreclosure part, I would slip in there. Hey, we can put a default agreement in there. And if something were to happen tragically, the sky is falling, you get the house back, and you get to keep all the money that we've given you. So it does make sense. It doesn't make sense for our business model, because we would be out of business if we would keep trashing place on these agreements. So you throw that in there, and then again, you pull back again. But if that's going to keep you up at night, then this is probably not the best.
Yeah, there's an example, like if you're doing a lease purchase, if the seller says, I want a down payment, that's going to rule lease purchase out, because we wouldn't put a down payment on something that we don't have any ownership of.
Yeah, we need to protect ourselves for sure.
Yeah. And the other thing that we really haven't gotten into is there are ways to get a down payment. And one of the common ways that I've used is the seller could get a HELOC, depending on how the numbers work out. They could get a HELOC and pull their money out, part of their equity out in advance. Obviously not $200,000, because there's an interest only typically on a HELOC, but we're taking care of the interest payments. So it's like free money to the seller.
Yeah, I use that all the time, because it's not taxed, right? It's the only thing would be closing costs, right? That they're doing to get that HELOC. It is simple interest, and we're going to be making those payments for you. So hypothetically, let's say it's $500,000 home, and they're like, I need 20%. Okay, why don't you take out $200,000? He said, don't take out $200,000. $200,000, that payment is probably going to be around, just interest only, probably $1,400. I think. So $1,400 payment, what could you rent it for? You're looking at these things, right? Now you said don't take out $200,000, but again, you're looking at the payment and see if it works, right? So if it does work, then go for it. They got their free money. They got their down payment they were asking for. There's no money out of our pocket. We're just taking care, we're just servicing that HELOC until we cash them out. Good point.
And the other thing is I don't promote that to them as though I'm advising them. I just say, I'll tell you what a lot of our sellers do and present it that way as other people have done that. It's totally up to them.
Yeah, again, mess with their ego because, and again, we're not saying it hasn't happened. This has happened. So it's true that sellers that we buy from have done this before. So it's not like we're blowing smoke up their butt. They have done this. So we're like, hey, some of the sellers that we bought from have done this. And I use 20%, but even if they said 10%, $100,000, what kind of a payment that? It's probably going to be, $700 payment. How cool is that? Where they take $100,000 out, they get their 10%. You're servicing a $700 interest only. You get, now you have the rent at 16, 17, 1800. Now you got $1,000 spread, which is cool. Yeah.
A lot of ways to be creative with it.
Yeah. Very cool. Let's pivot to our game plan. Today's game plan is owner financing. We alluded to it right at the beginning. You're working on a deal right now where the seller was very specific on what they wanted. So I think I know the original, and then you can tell me how you guys pivoted. The original, what they wanted originally, and what was the price of the house?
It was $390. Asking price was $399.
So $399, so $400,000. And the seller's, okay, I want 15 years. Like, I think the associate says, oh, we can do 10 or 15. She goes, no, I want 15. So here's a situation where the sellers, they know what they want, which is 15 years. They wanted 5.5% and $50,000 down. So more than 10%, which that doesn't fit our model, right? You spoke with the seller. And then what was your pivot and how did you frame it?
So first up, what we did is we looked at the numbers, obviously the first go around. And what we do is we'll put together some options for the seller and what we come up with for numbers. And then get on the phone and follow up with them and pivot if we need to, depending on negotiate that. The other thing is we ran the numbers and the rent comps. There were no rent comps. But it's a 2-bedroom. It's got a huge workshop in the back with multiple stalls and huge 2 or 3 car garage and a good amount of land. I figure you could probably get 1950. I wanted to keep it under 2,000. It was very rewarding. So that's pretty reasonable. But if you took a look at the interest payments on that, what we did is we do first year principal only payments, which we try to do. If the seller's not good with that, try 6 months principal only. So at least you get some principal payment pay down in there. And then what I did is if you amortize that, it's more than the 1950. So we looked at, okay, what's simple interest? Simple interest, if we look at 5% and the payment were $1,500, that fits within that rent. So the numbers did work for that. So we gave her the option of 5%. And we took the down payment, which we would get from the buyer, at 5%. So there's a good rule of thumb, 555. And so we did 5% down, which was $20,000 and 5% interest and principal only for the first year.
Okay. And we just got done talking about the down payment in our warm up. Again, they wanted 50. And if I remember correctly, they were pretty adamant that it was 50 or nothing. Right. I think the original conversation with Annette was, I want 50 and that we're going no lower and we want 5.5 and 15 years. So how did that conversation go with dropping from 50 to 20? You dropped it to 30,000. So how was that?
One thing on the call that I did miss, and she's got somebody advising her. I don't know who he is. I don't think it's not her husband. I don't believe. I did not use the quadrant, which I don't know why. I normally do.
Yeah, we just talked about it.
Perfect. I just said we went through the numbers. They said based on the numbers, we figured we could get 1950, and I worked into it that way, and that's what we came up with. And now the person that was advising her said, I'm buying a house right now and I've got an 800 plus credit score and I'm putting down 60% or maybe it was 60,000. And he says, and the interest rate's much higher than that. And I just told him that I used an example. I said, I had $1 million property I was talking to the seller on, and he wanted 20% down. That wouldn't happen with us, but we could take it to market as an owner finance because there are buyers. But you have to be competitive. So you're advertising it below market rates, which makes it more competitive in the market. And he said, yeah, I get it.
There you go. Awesome. Good stuff. So we're waiting on their answer. So you guys countered with 5, and 15, I guess. It would be 5% down, 5% interest, 15. And then the 15, if I understand, is they want a prepayment penalty, right? She doesn't want to be cashed out, correct?
She wants 15 years of interest. So in the option, we just said prepayment TBD because that's something we need to discuss. Because if you have a 10-year buyer, they could cash it out in 14 years. So what happens to that other year? So there has to be some flexibility built in there.
Yeah, if it's like a 1% prepayment, who cares? And then you can do the reverse, right? And we talked about it off the air. That would be a unique buyer, right? Because we would start out with rent to own, and then if that rent to own buyer hypothetically got us to 20%, so now we're 15% over what we gave the seller, right? So if they give us 20, and then we charge them 7%, so now you're 2% over what you give them the seller. So Chris calls it a payday 4, so to speak, right? Now you're becoming the bank, you're owner financing this tenant buyer, but it has to be a unique buyer. It has to be somebody who is legitimately could put 20% down and can afford 7% interest. And then you're going to create a prepayment, right? Because you don't want, if they cash you out, because the way they cash you out is they just refinance you out, right? They go get a traditional loan and cash you out, which if they cash you out, then you're cashing the seller out and then you have to pay that prepayment penalty, right?
And the other option that Annette and her husband have is they could rent it out to a regular tenant for, say, 12 or 13 years, and then put a tenant buyer in there for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And get them cashed out.
There you go. Yeah, you're just you're waiting for your paydays because we talk about the 3 payday system. So do you want your payday 1, which is our non-refundable down payment from the tenant buyer? Do you want that now? Or do you want that in 14 years, like you said, 13 years, whatever? Good stuff. Let's cool down, Rick. Cool down. We just had last week our In the Trenches Bootcamp, and it was a virtual event. And we've talked about the In the Trenches Bootcamp where you go to Rhode Island. There's probably select few, probably maybe 10 to 15 people, including the coaches. We were there last time. This one is virtual. So talk about that. I know Chris, he has a spiel, right? He has his slides and he talks about how we can help them, how they can make money and all that kind of stuff. Talk about the other things that we did during that call.
So we made live calls. We had associates that we had them give us sellers that they dealt with who needed a follow-up. So we just called the seller and did the follow-up right there live in front of everybody. Which is awesome.
Yeah, it was real cool because we both did, you and I did one. And these were non-associates. These are just Joe Schmoes off the streets. We gave them a login, we gave them a link. They just logged in and they just most were flies on the wall. That a lot of them, their cameras were off. So they were just listening. I would say a third of them had their cameras on. And then, like you said, we took leads from associates that we have in the community already that are doing deals or that are hot, right? They're bringing us deals that are. Jeremiah brought me a deal, and the owner was really cool. Both sellers were really transparent about what they wanted, and I think they both wanted down payments, if I remember correctly. And then we got critiqued. We critiqued each other, and you said, "Hey, you probably could have said this," and Chris said, "You could have said this," and then I told you, "Oh, you could have said this." And so we were actually critiquing each other in front of 100 people, which was cool.
Yep. It's always one thing you got to be open to is critique. It's so important. And even Chris will tell you, he'll do a call and get off the call and say, I didn't even say this.
Yeah, this is the guy who runs, who's the CEO, COO, and he'll get off the phone. Man, I forgot to say, and I got off the phone. I said, I forgot to say this right for everybody.
That's how we started off, but I didn't use the quadrant with that seller I was talking about on the owner finance deal.
That's right. Yeah, and I, to be honest with you, I even admitted it early in the podcast today that I forgot the acronym to the free. So there's times where I don't use it, but that was the beauty of it, because we showed them what we do. We're in the trenches. We're making calls for sellers. We're trying to get them on appointments. And when they're on appointments, we're calling in while they're there. That was my first deal, right, with Mike McCready's. I was at the appointment. Mike called in. I set the phone right there on the kitchen table. Mike on the phone was talking to the sellers as I was just listening. We're there. We're holding hands, figuratively. Sometimes
It's
we're
truly in the trenches. Yep.
Yeah. And again, we're not bashing any other coaching program out there, but I feel that we're in there. We do what we say we're going to do. John called me, or John Bristol Slack messaged. I think it's like 11 a.m. this morning, my time. And I responded right away. And we tried to make a call within 15 minutes when he Slack messaged me. And he was like, oh, that's super cool that you were able to just hop on the phone right away. So good stuff. What do we got coming up? We have June. We have the June in the trenches, right? Yep.
There is one coming up in June.
And then we have our QOS live. And
June 4th, 5th, and 6th is the next one.
Yeah.
And that's in person.
Yep. And then we have our October one and QOS live in Boston. In Boston, Mass. Can't wait. I don't know if I told you, my wife and I are going to come up 2 days earlier, and we're going to be tourists for Saturday and Sunday, and then
I'll give you some tips of where to go.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there's some
cannolis and the best pizza around.
Oh yeah, lots to do. Cool. Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it. We'll see you later.
Yeah. Thanks, Rusty.
All right. Have a good one, everybody.
Yeah, everybody.